This happened to me in 1996. My name is Daniel, and that October I was 29 years old, working as a claims adjuster out of Calgary. My mother and my younger sister Renee lived on a small farm outside Brandon, Manitoba, and every year I made the same drive east along the Trans-Canada Highway to spend the long weekend with them. It was around 11 hours on a good day, longer if the weather did not cooperate. And that year, the weather did not cooperate. A cold front had rolled down from the north, and by the time I crossed into Saskatchewan, the sky had turned the color of wet concrete. I was driving my father's old blue sedan, the one he left me after he passed away that spring. It still carried that old mix of vinyl, dust, and the pine air freshener he had always kept near the dash. On the passenger seat sat a paper map, folded and refolded so many times the creases had gone soft. In the trunk was a small wooden box that had belonged to him, a set of hand tools I was bringing to give to Renee's husband as a gift. My mother had asked me to bring it specially, wrapped in a dish towel so it would not rattle around while I drove. It mattered to me more than I let on. It felt like carrying a piece of my father home. I had a cassette playing, one my father made years earlier, a mix of old country songs recorded off the radio with his own voice, sometimes cutting in between tracks, saying something about the weather or a joke he wanted remembered. I played it every year on this drive. It was the closest thing I had to company. That year had been a hard one. My father's passing in the spring had left my mother quieter than I had ever known her, and money had been tight since I helped her with some of the expenses afterward. Thanksgiving mattered more than it usually did, not because of the food or whatever happened to be playing on the radio, but because it was the first time since he passed away that all three of us would sit at the same table again. I had promised Renee on the telephone the week before that nothing would keep me from getting there, and I meant it the way a person means something before they understand what a promise might cost. By 11 that night, I was tired enough that my eyes had started to sting, and when I saw the sign for a rest area near the Manitoba border, I decided to stop rather than push through. It was an ordinary-looking place, a gravel lot with a single concrete building holding washrooms, a payphone bolted to the outside wall, and two picnic tables nobody would use in October. Two vehicles were already parked there when I pulled in, a dark-colored car near the building and a pickup truck angled at the far end of the lot, its hood raised. That was the first ordinary thing. A truck with engine trouble at a rest stop was nothing unusual on a night that cold. I had seen it a dozen times on this same stretch of highway over the years. People pulled over with a failed battery or a bad hose, and I had stopped myself more than once to help a stranger get moving again. There was no reason to think this night was any different. I parked under the one working light in the lot, a tall pole lamp that buzzed faintly and threw a pale yellow circle over the gravel, and I sat for a moment with the engine ticking as it cooled, looking at the dark shapes of the prairie stretching out beyond the fence line. Somewhere out there, the wind was moving through cut wheat fields, and I could hear it even with my window rolled up. A low, steady sound that made the rest area feel smaller and more exposed than it should have. The second thing, the one that felt wrong without my being able to say why, was that both men standing near the pickup turned to watch me pull in, and neither one looked back at the engine again until I had parked and shut off my lights. I told myself I was imagining it. Tired drivers imagine things. I got out to stretch my legs and use the washroom, and the cold hit me harder than I expected, sharp enough that my breath came out in a cloud. The two men by the truck were still there when I came back out, one of them leaning under the raised hood with a flashlight, the other standing off to the side with his hands in his coat pockets, not doing much of anything. I noticed, almost without meaning to, that there were no tools laid out on the fender and no toolbox open on the ground. A man working on an engine usually has something in his hands. I walked to the payphone to call my mother, and let her know I would be later than planned. The receiver was cold enough to sting my ear, and while I waited for the line to connect, I glanced toward the truck again. The man who had been standing with his hands in his pockets had moved to the passenger side and was writing something in a small notebook, glancing up at my car as he did. I told myself he was probably writing down a part number or a mileage figure, something a man might jot down while waiting on a friend to fix an engine. It was the kind of small detail that meant nothing on its own, and everything once I understood the rest of the night. There was a paper sign taped to the wall beside the payphone listing the hours for a nearby towing service, and beneath it someone had scratched a few numbers into the metal frame with a key or a coin, faint enough that I only noticed because the pole light was angled just right. I did not think much of it then. I think about it often now. My mother answered on the third ring, and hearing her voice made the cold lot feel less strange. She told me Renee had already started peeling potatoes and that they would keep a plate warm no matter how late I got in. I told her I loved her and hung up. When I turned back toward my car, one of the men had climbed into the passenger side of the pickup. The other was lowering the hood. I should have left then. I did not yet, because I still had half a thermos of coffee to finish, and I told myself the cold air would wake me up properly before I got back on the highway. I sat in my car with the engine idling for warmth, the cassette still playing quietly, and I noticed the CB radio my father had installed years earlier, the one I almost never used because I had no reason to. Out of habit more than anything, I reached over and turned the dial, half expecting static. What I heard instead made my stomach tighten before I understood why. A man's voice, flat and unhurried, was talking to someone else on the channel. He said something about an older blue car sitting alone near the washrooms. He said the driver looked like he was traveling by himself. Then he said to wait until the highway cleared out a little more before anyone moved. I sat completely still, my hand on the dial, telling myself it could be about someone else's car. There were other vehicles on the road that night. It did not have to mean me. Then the voice read 3 letters, followed by 3 numbers. They were my license plate. I did not turn the radio off. I knew there was no way they could tell I was listening, but some part of me still did not want to make any sudden movement. My hands were shaking as I reached for the gear shift, moving slowly, trying to look like a man simply finishing his coffee and preparing to leave rather than a man who had just heard himself described over a radio channel by strangers in a parking lot. A second voice came through then, quieter, and asked whether the driver was still alone or whether someone else was expected to meet him. The first voice answered that as far as they could tell, he was traveling by himself, heading east, probably visiting family for the holiday given the time of night and the direction. The way he said it, so plainly and so certain, made me colder than the weather had. It sounded like they knew more than what they could see in that parking lot. I thought back over the last hour, trying to understand how they could have known my direction, my plate, anything about me at all. Then I remembered the service station about 40 minutes back, the one where I had stopped for gas and asked the attendant, an older man with a Manitoba Road atlas taped behind the counter, how much farther it was to Brandon. He had been friendly in the easy way small town attendants often are, tracing the route for me with one finger and telling me to watch for animals past a certain crossroads. I remembered mentioning, without thinking twice about it, that I was heading home for the holiday to see my mother and sister, and that I was traveling alone because my wife had stayed behind in Calgary with a bad cold. I remembered a pickup truck parked at the edge of that same lot while I paid, its engine running, nobody visibly inside that I had noticed. And I remembered another man near the newspaper rack by the door who had not seemed to be reading anything at all. I had thought nothing of it at the time. Now I could not stop thinking about it. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the rest area slowly, watching the mirror the entire time. The pickup did not move right away. For a moment I thought perhaps I had been wrong. That worry had built something out of nothing. Then, as I merged back onto the highway, I saw its headlights swing out behind me. It kept a steady distance, Not getting closer, not falling back, just staying there. The highway was nearly empty, black fields on either side broken only by the occasional yard light from a distant farmhouse. I drove faster than I normally would have on a road like that at night, and the pickup matched my speed. Whenever I slowed slightly, it slowed. When I picked up speed again, so did it. That was when I stopped trying to convince myself it was coincidence. I reached for the CB. I did not know who else might be listening, including the men behind me, so I did not explain everything. I simply asked whether there were any eastbound drivers ahead of me. Static answered first. Then a woman's voice came through. She said she was part of a group of 3 transport trucks traveling east and asked where I was. I gave her the last highway marker I remembered passing. She said they were several miles ahead. I asked if I could catch up and stay near them for a while. There was a brief pause. Then she asked, "You having trouble back there?" I looked at the pickup in my mirror. I said, "There's a vehicle that's been behind me since the last rest area. I'd rather not be alone on this stretch." Her voice changed slightly. Still calm, just more serious. She said, "Keep coming east. You'll see our marker lights. Stay behind the last truck when you catch us." For the next several minutes, I watched the darkness ahead almost as much as I watched the mirror. Then I saw them. 3 sets of red marker lights moving in the same direction, spaced along the highway ahead of me. I gradually caught up. The last truck slowed just enough to let me settle behind it. I stayed there. The other 2 trucks were farther ahead, but all 3 remained close enough that I could see their lights. The pickup behind me did not disappear immediately. For several miles it stayed back. I kept watching it. Somewhere past a crossroads with a small closed grain elevator, the pickup slowed. Its headlights turned away from the highway. Then they were gone. I did not relax, not yet. The woman's voice came over the CB again and asked, "You still with us, blue sedan?" I said, "I'm here." She asked, "Pickup still behind you?" I checked the mirror one more time. I said, "No." It turned off. She told me there was an open service station with a night attendant about 15 minutes ahead and that I could make a call from there. I thanked her more times than was probably necessary. The 3 trucks stayed ahead of me until I reached the station. The attendant was a heavy-set man in a company jacket who listened while I asked to use his telephone to contact the local station. He did not make a joke about it. He did not tell me I was imagining things. He simply handed me the telephone and glanced toward the highway while I made the call. An officer arrived a short time later. He was in his 40s, tired-looking but patient, and he listened without interrupting while I explained the rest area, the notebook, the CB conversation, my license plate, and the pickup following me. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment. Then he told me they had received 2 other reports that fall from people traveling alone who believed they had been watched at that same rest area. One person had reported a vehicle following him for several miles after he left. Another had noticed 2 men watching cars in the lot and left before anything else happened. The officer said they did not know whether those reports were connected to what had happened to me. He said one possibility was that more than one vehicle was involved and that people were communicating by radio along the highway. But he was careful to call it exactly that, a possibility. They had no proof. Nobody had been identified. He suggested I stay near other traffic for the rest of the drive and contact them again if I saw the pickup. I finally reached my mother's farm a little after 2 in the morning. The porch light was still on, and Renee had left a plate covered on the stove, exactly as promised. My mother came into the kitchen in her robe when she heard me. She hugged me and asked why I was so late. I did not tell them everything that night. I did not want to worry my mother on the eve of a holiday she loved. I simply told her the weather had slowed me down and that I was tired. For the next 2 days, I tried to put the drive behind me. We ate together. We talked about my father. Renee's husband helped my mother with a loose cabinet door in the kitchen. For a little while, sitting there with my family, I almost managed to forget about that highway. But I never forgot the sound of a stranger reading my license plate over the radio before I had even left that rest area.